For those who don't know, but I think most do, but for those who don't, what we're doing here at Elevate 2.0 on Thursdays is we've brought in a couple of new components, and one of the new components is the book that is kind of an anchor for us. And the very first book that we're going through is The Alchemist, which is one of my absolute favorite books. And I'm seeing Sarah smiling, so I'm thinking you've read it, okay? And so we are maybe about a third of the way through, and it's been a little slow going, for the last several weeks, but it's because there is so much in every single scene, every single conversation, every single sort of 10, page clip. There's so much going on there. And the reason that this book is the one that came to the surface with all of the other choices that were there is because it started in the month of relatability. And there are so many themes in this book that are universal, that so many people, no matter where you're from, no matter how old you are, no matter where you are on your journey, can relate to. And so where we left off last week, well, actually, let me just recap for a moment. Last week, we had been introduced to, it was the second week that we were in with the crystal merchant at the crystal shop, and the boy had been working steadily there for some time, and even though he was there, resigned to work to make enough money to go back to Spain to be with his sheep, every few weeks or so, he'd come up with this idea, inspiration would hit, and he'd go to the crystal merchant and say, hey, we should try to do this because it's going to make things better. And the crystal merchant, even though he was a very kind and compassionate and loving man, was very set in his ways, and every single time would argue against it, but then eventually come around. And at the end, just before the boy decided he was actually going to go back to searching for his treasure and go to Egypt, we were sort of left with this question, this curiosity about, is it better to just dream your dreams and not really live them out? Or is life more worth it if you actually dream your dreams and then follow them and see what happens? So there's this ongoing tug of war that has constantly been going on for the boy, or Santiago. But every single time, even though he might shrink back to, I'm going to go back to Spain, I'm going to do what I know, I'm going to go with the familiar, there's that in him that rises and pushes him just a little bit more out of his comfort zone, and he experiences more. And then he shrinks back a bit, and then he experiences more, and then back and more. Can anyone relate to that? Okay, all right, okay, so some nodding heads. All right, so in this section, we are introduced to one of my favorite characters in the book, the Englishman. The Englishman is someone who is on his way to Egypt because he wants to meet someone known as the Alchemist. Now, he has devoted many, many years, tons of time and energy and effort, and most of the inheritance that he got from his father to study whatever he can, the books, the languages, the philosophies, the whatever it is, trying to find how to become an alchemist so that when he meets up with the alchemist, he has something that he can connect with him about. And so we meet this Englishman as he's sitting here reading a book and going over all of the important things that he has to go over because he knows the alchemist is going to put him to the test when he finally meets him. And he's kind of smelling all of these animals, and there's all these sounds and all these people and all this stuff happening. But he's thinking, I'm on my path, I'm on my journey, I must meet this alchemist. This is my purpose in life. And so he's waiting for the caravan to move. And as he's waiting for the caravan, this is what he's thinking. He had already spent much of the fortune left to him by his father fruitlessly seeking the philosopher's stone. He had spent enormous amounts of time at the great libraries of the world and had purchased all the rarest and most important volumes on alchemy. In one, he had read that many years ago, a famous Arabian alchemist had visited Europe. It was said that he was more than 200 years old and that he had discovered the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. The Englishman had been profoundly impressed by the story, but he never would have thought it more than just a myth had not a friend of his, returning from an archaeological expedition in the desert, told him about an Arab that was possessed of exceptional powers. And so right now, the Englishman is waiting with bated breath for this caravan to take off so that he can go and meet this 200-year-old guy who has these powers and knows how to do this incredible stuff that he has been reading about for many, 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 many years. And as he's sitting there and waiting, he notices what looks to be a young Arab boy. Now, this young Arab boy is our boy, Santiago. We know he's from Spain. He's not an Arab, but because he has spent some time in Africa already, he dresses like an Arab, his skin has darkened, he speaks Arabic, and so he comes across, as an Arab. So then we meet the boy again. "That's strange," said the boy as he tried once again to read the burial scene that began the book. "I've been trying for 2 years to read this book, and I never got past these first few pages." Even without a king to provide an interruption, he was unable to concentrate. He still had some doubts about the decision he had made, but he was able to understand one thing. Making a decision was only the beginning of things. When someone makes a decision, he is really diving into a strong current that will carry him to places he had never dreamed of when he first made the decision. "When I decided to seek out my treasure, I never imagined that I'd wind up working in a crystal shop," he thought. "And joining this caravan may have been my decision, but where it goes is going to be a mystery to me." And so here we can see that the boy has so much more confidence now. He has so much more faith, and he is willing to let whatever it is that's meant to happen, happen. He's made his decision, the big one, to not go back to Spain, but to go to Egypt in search of this personal legend that came to him in a dream that he still doesn't quite understand. And he's trusting that whatever is supposed to happen is going to happen, whomever he's supposed to meet, he will meet, and whatever resources he requires along the way, they're going to show up. And all of this, he's just risking everything that he's had up until now because he's opening himself up to what's possible versus simply going back to what's probable. So he and the Englishman start a conversation. And even though both of them are kind of sizing each other up and they're both like, I don't know about this person, the boy pulls out the 2 stones, Urim and Thummim. And all of a sudden the Englishman is like, whoa, this guy knows about the stones. He has these incredible stones. And so this is a connection that they make right away. And so they start talking about Urim and Thummim. And the boy's like, okay, wait a minute though. These are very precious to me, but they're not for sale. But I was about to say the old king. But the Englishman then tells him about, even though the stones themselves don't have a lot of monetary value, they have a lot of significance. And he tells them the meaning of the stones from the Bible and how important they were. And it makes the boy feel really good. It makes him think about his time about the king. And it makes him realize that, yeah, this is actually something that is meant to happen for him. And so they're both thinking, meeting each other, that's a good omen. The fact that they both have these stones, that's a good omen. And they're starting to realize there's more that's connecting them than first met the eye. And so they're talking, they're having a conversation about these omens. The Englishman asks the boy why he's going to Egypt. The boy tells him that he's looking for treasure, but then it's like, oops, maybe I said too much. But the Englishman doesn't really pay attention, just says something like, yeah, me too. So they share a little bit by bit, about what it is that they're doing and why they're going. And then during their conversation, the leader of the caravan comes up and then basically puts the fear of God into everyone who's joining the caravan by telling them, you have to pay attention to everything that I tell you. I'm the leader of the caravan. If you don't, then you could potentially die. Okay? So he then says, I believe in the one true God, who is Allah. But I want everyone now, whomever it is that you believe in, whomever it is that you pray to, whoever it is that is your guide, please say a prayer to them for safe passage and for safe journey. A long note was sounded on a bugle, and everyone mounted up. The boy and the Englishman had bought camels and climbed uncertainly onto their backs. The boy felt sorry for the Englishman's camel, loaded down as he was with the cases of books. There's no such thing as coincidence, said the Englishman, picking up the conversation where it had been interrupted in the warehouse. I'm here because a friend of mine heard of an Arab who... But the caravan began to move, and it was impossible to hear what the Englishman was saying. The boy knew what he was about to describe, though. the mysterious chain that links one thing to another, the same chain that had caused him to become a shepherd, that had caused his recurring dream, that had brought him to a city near Africa to find a king and to be robbed in order to meet a crystal merchant. And the closer one gets to realizing his personal legend, the more that personal legend becomes his true reason for being, thought the boy. And so when I read this, and I was thinking about this morning, what came to mind for me was a phrase that's attributed to Joseph Campbell, which is follow your bliss. And that's basically the same thing that they're talking about here in this story of realizing your personal legend or following your dreams. That there is something that is such a massive, intensive call on your heart, on your being, that you can't help but go and follow that. And then I really started thinking, is it just about following? Or is it kind of like when the boy was thinking about his sheep earlier in the book, and he's talking about, I wonder if it was really the sheep teaching me things, or if I was learning from them. And here I'm thinking, is it really just about following, or is it also allowing yourself to be led? And so the title of my talk today is, Follow and Be Led. Your bliss awaits. And so I just want to shift directions for a moment, because this morning, another thing that came into my purview was a post by Sherry Morgan, one of our members and a friend to many of us here. And it was actually about Paulo Coelho's life. And I realized in the 8 or so years that I've been reading this book again and again and again and again and again, I actually don't know very much about him. And so there was this post on Facebook, and it talked about how when he was 19, his parents thought that he was having a mental breakdown, and so they institutionalized him. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And every time, he ran away. And the reason that they institutionalized him was because he said he wanted to be a writer. They wanted him to be a lawyer, I think it was, and they thought that because he was talking about being a writer, that this creativity was somehow a psychotic or mental break or something, and that he needed to be fixed so that he could actually, ironically, live out his personal legend that they thought was the one for him, right? And so the thing was that he did pursue his dream to become a writer, and he wrote The Alchemist. The first publisher who published it thought that it was an absolute bomb. It did so poorly in sales that they actually released him from his contract, gave him the rights to the book back, and washed their hands of the whole thing. But he slowly but surely handed the book out to people, eventually found a publisher that did want to work with him, and over the past several decades, to date, this book has sold over 150 million copies and has been translated in over 80 different languages. And it's not the only book that he's written, right? He actually did read a book, I forget what the title of it is right now, about his time in the psychiatric hospital, because he wanted to inspire people with mental illness that doesn't have to define you, that there are other ways to live your life if this is something that you navigate. But anyway, I thought it was so cool to learn that about him because he was so determined. And the thing is, it said on a blog, on his blog, on his website, that he never blamed his parents and that he never had to forgive them because he knew that they were only doing what was in their capacity to do, that this is what they truly believed was in his best interests. And even though it was something that so many other people would think is so heinous and so traumatic, that this was all part of his journey, it was all part of theirs. So, going back to the book, the caravan is now traveling, and the boy is paying attention to everything. He thought he was going to do some reading, but he's given up on reading the book because there's so much to take in the desert, with the people, with the camel drivers, with every single aspect of this caravan, and he's paying attention to all of it. And so he's thinking to himself, I've learned things from the sheep, and I've learned things from crystal. I can learn things from the desert too. It seems old and wise. And then he continues thinking as he feels the wind, how he felt the wind back in Tarifa. He continues thinking about his sheep and thinking, they're not my sheep anymore. They belong to someone else, and they have a relationship with someone else. He thinks about the merchant's daughter and how she's probably married some other baker or something like that. And he thinks about all these things that he's kind of left behind in pursuit of this personal legend. But at the same time, he was excited at his intuitive understanding of the camel driver's comment. Maybe he was also learning the universal language that deals with the past and the present of all people. Hunches, his mother used to call them. The boy was beginning to understand that intuition is really a sudden immersion of the soul into the universal current of life, where the histories of all people are connected, and we are all able to know everything because it's all written there. Maktub. And for those who weren't here last week and haven't read the book, Maktub, loosely translated, is "it is written." But what I wanted to offer is that when I see it, I think, and so it is. Because whatever we decide, knowingly or unknowingly, becomes our life experience. And so we are writing our experience. We are creating and telling our story one choice at a time, one experience at a time, one thought at a time, one breath at a time. It's not like there's some big book where everybody's life is written out. It is something that we are creating and experiencing, part and parcel, all at the same time. So the caravan continues, and the boy is noticing how sometimes they have to go around places because the camels don't want to walk on certain types of ground, challenges and obstacles. But no matter what happens, he realizes as he pulls back, the caravan is always headed to the same point. The caravan is always following the same star that points out where this oasis is, where they're traveling to. And so one night, as they're traveling along, he's talking to a different camel driver, and this camel driver tells him the story of his life. He tells him that he and his family used to live in a city in Egypt, and things were amazing. And finally, when he had enough money, he and his family went to Mecca, and he fulfilled the last thing that he had to fulfill as a Muslim. And he thought, now I have accomplished everything. I have lived out my personal legend. I have done all those 5 main things that I was supposed to do according to the Quran, and I can die a happy and fulfilled man. And then shortly after that, there was a massive earthquake and a flood, and it completely wiped out his home, his crop, and his family was left with nothing, and he had to start all over again. But as he's telling this to the boy is listening, and what the boy hears is that it doesn't matter what happens because it's the journey that is the whole thing. The journey is the thing that is the gift, and that we are the ones who get to decide how to navigate even the worst challenges that come up. The camel driver says, we're afraid of losing what we have, whether it's our life, our possessions, and property. But this fear evaporates when we understand that our life stories and the history of the world were written by the same hand. So again, it's not like there is a book that has everybody's path outlined. Every moment we are creating our life anew, and every moment we are at choice. We are at choice to show up and choose and create according to that call on our heart, our truth, our inherent, loving, amazing, creative, infinite nature, or the things that we have known up until now, the things we have experienced up until now, the thoughts, beliefs, the stories, all of the stuff that is familiar, all of the memories. We can keep going with that, but what happens if we do that? We get more of that. But if we want to open up to those infinite possibilities of who and what we can become, those infinite possibilities of how we can show up in the world, how we can share our gifts, how we can support the world in becoming a more loving and vibrant, engaging, fulfilled, peaceful place, then we got to trust. We got to be ready to let go of everything that we know. People, relationships, stuff, jobs, so many aspects of life if we really want to lean into a bigger version of who we are. And that's how part of that expansion and then slight contraction. And then bigger expansion and again slight contraction happens. Because for most of us, we're not just going to go and just become everything that we can be. We're going to have to test those boundaries again and again and again and again, kind of like when a little toddler is learning to walk, or when they're finally talking and they start saying no to everything. They're drawing a boundary, right? But they're testing those boundaries all the time. How much more can I say? How much more defiant can I be? This is what's happening for the boy. This is what's happening for the Englishman, even though he doesn't really know it and isn't aware of it in the same way. So they continue on, and one night the Englishman can't sleep, and so he asks the boy to go for a walk. And he asks the boy to tell him about his life and his adventures. And so the boy tells him all about his adventures, and the Englishman is just so fascinated by what happened at the crystal shop. And as the boy is telling him about all these innovations and all these things and all the ways that he convinced the crystal merchant to up-level in his shop and experience life in a more engaging and fulfilling and prosperous way, the Englishman says, that's the principle that governs all things. In alchemy, it's called the soul of the world. He goes on to say that everything on the face of the earth had a soul, whether mineral, vegetable, or animal, or even just a simple thought. Everything on earth is being continuously transformed because the earth is alive and it has a soul. We are part of that soul, so we rarely recognize it, that it is working for us. But in the crystal shop, you probably realize that even the glasses were collaborating in your success. And as I read that statement, as I hear Jeremy Irons narrate that statement, I think about VTC. And I think about this actual building and how this building is calling in community and how this building continues to call in the extraordinary music that we get to experience again and again and again. And as long as each and every one of us, whether you're a member or not, but each and every one of us is present to those possibilities, is present to all of this stuff that is going on, that is interconnected, the more aligned we are with that, then the more this community can thrive, the more we can grow, the more we can support other communities out in the greater Victoria community, and the more that intention ripples out into the world. The boy thought about that for a while as he looked at the moon and the beach sands. I have watched the caravan as it crossed the desert, he said. The caravan and the desert speak the same language, and it's for that reason that the desert allows the crossing. It's going to test the caravans every step to see if it's in time, and if it is, we will make it to the oasis. If either of us had joined this caravan based on only personal courage, but without understanding that language, this journey would have been much more difficult. They stood there looking at the moon. That's the magic of omens, said the boy. I've seen how the guides read the signs of the desert and how the soul of the caravan speaks to the soul of the desert. The Englishman said, I'd better pay more attention to the caravan. And I'd better read your books, said the boy. So in addition to following and allowing to be read, there's also this fine balance, kind of like the drops of oil story closer to the beginning of the book, where it is important to gather knowledge like the Englishman has, and then it is important to have faith like the boy has. But to do only one or the other, you're going to miss out on this whole other aspect of life and living. So the whole point of the journey is to have faith that you are being guided, that you are supported, and that whatever you need is going to be brought to you along the way, and then tune into that stuff that's brought to you along the way, because that's going to help you to navigate the entire experience with that much more success. Thank you, and so it is.